Lettuce is not boring. What you find in the grocery store is not what it used to be. I've researched the backstory of this plant that I love to grow, and I'll never look at salad the same way again.
Lettuce has quite the mischievous past. You wouldn't think that just by looking at the leaves. However, beneath its placid plant persona, you'll find a wild character who's at times lascivious, at times languid. I invite you into a journey of discovery of what may be hiding in plain sight on your dinner plate. From salmonella deaths to lecherous leanings, these leafy greens are far from garden variety botanicals. Why was lettuce hailed as a powerful aphrodisiac by ancient Egyptians only to gain the opposite reputation amongst Greeks? Why did Roman emperors count this plant as medicine while medieval monks relied on it to ward off demons? How did it make a disgraced French aristocrat running from the guillotine amass a fortune overnight? You are about to find out as I share my own experience growing this king of salad greens in the garden. Let us explore the secret life of lettuce. Lettuce starts its life as a seed, and that fact alone may come as a surprise to people who have never gardened before, since we never get to see lettuce flowers in the grocery store. But it turns out that lettuce is part of the daisy family, a distant relative of sunflowers, a fact you only realize if you ever allow them to grow past their harvesting prime, becoming bitter as it flowers, what we call bolting. Lettuce seeds germinate fast under perfect conditions, so I use a trick to get my lettuce growing soon, kickstarting germination.
It's right around February when you actually feel a difference in terms of how long the day is starting to get, and you feel a sense of hope, a sense of a new beginning, and planting seeds is just the appropriate thing to do. Lettuce is one of the easiest plants to grow because it germinates rather reliably.
You could simply drop lettuce seeds on the ground during early spring, raking them in lightly to still allow sunlight to reach the seeds, and make sure the ground stays constantly moist for the following 2 weeks, the old-fashioned way, or you could use my preferred method for uniform seedlings.
As usual, I'll use the plate-germination method, and that entails simply providing an enclosed space that's moist and has something for the seeds to germinate on that I can later on, as soon as they sprout, transplant them into soil. Obviously, you don't need something as fancy as this for your germination station. Just any kind of container that can close will do. I just like to use things that I already have around, and why not make life be a little bit more fantastical?
A seed is fantastical if you stop and ponder. A seemingly dead capsule containing the life force of a brand new plant ready to rise from the dust. Ancient Egyptians were obsessed with the concept of death and rebirth, and even enclosed themselves into capsules after death, hoping to rise again as they copied cycles seen in nature. Lettuce was known as an aphrodisiac in ancient Egypt. It features rather disturbingly in Egyptian mythology, but the type of lettuce they used back then was not quite the same we love to grow and eat today. The wild lettuce they purported to have aphrodisiac effects was the bitter Lactuca seriola. Instead of eating the leaves in salads, Egyptians used the seeds to extract oil that could be used in cooking and medicine and even mummification. All the soft entrails of the body, including guts and brain, were removed, and the remaining carcass was dehydrated using natron, a naturally occurring substance similar to baking soda harvested from dry lake beds. Without the inner organs, the body was nothing more than a shell, unlike a viable seed that holds its embryo, the germ, safe inside. They would then rub the body with essential oils including cedar and lettuce oil, and wrap it with strips of linen as a shell to protect from outside moisture that could make the mummy decay. But moisture is precisely the agent that reawakens life inside seeds. But for it to get past the seed shell barrier, a constant moist environment is needed. To promote that, I needed absorbent strips not of linen, but of something else.
I am using a paper towel. There is a trick. Sometimes I read comments of people who say they tried the paper towel method to germinate things, and they just had the seeds being stuck within the fibers. And that usually happens because they're using paper towel that's a little bit better than they should be.
Paper napkins or toilet paper are what I recommend because they absorb and hold water well, while at the same time breaking apart easily later on. While it is more convenient to buy ready-to-plant seedlings from garden centers, growing lettuce from seed can be cheaper and will allow you to grow more varieties.
I suppose not all kids understand the value of lettuce, and several adults don't either. I just always liked lettuce. Maybe I was a weird kid. I remember clearly doing lettuce sandwiches where it was just bread and lettuce as a sandwich with salt. I guess it just had peculiar taste as a child. Not that it has really changed that much.
It is common to use Ziploc bags for this method, but I've discovered that an enclosed glass dish with a saucer works better because it allows for a hidden chamber in the bottom where water can be poured to increase humidity inside without drowning out the seeds. This ensures maximum germination. I suppose ancient Egyptians would have loved this method to increase abundance. Lettuce was used by Min, the Egyptian god of fertility, and it is its milky sap that you can still observe in modern lettuce when you break a full head that was linked to the powers of fertility and amorous prowess. This milky sap is actually latex, very similar to the latex extracted from rubber trees in the Amazon rainforest. The milky sap is what gave lettuce its name, since it comes from the Latin lactuca, meaning milky. For the lettuce seeds to start producing their own living sap, all they needed now was to be awakened by water.
Do remember not to overwater, because you don't want your seeds drowning or swimming in water. That's going to kill them. They need to just be slightly moist. And that's why you barely wet the paper towel. And if you close it, it doesn't really need to be an airtight seal. It just needs to be an enclosed space.
While the ancient Egyptians swore by the power of lettuce to arouse, the Greeks and Romans believed lettuce had quite the opposite effect, causing people to fall into deep slumber overtaken by lethargy. Ancient Romans seemed to enjoy having food coma after a large meal, as the lettuce leaves were served at the end of meals to induce sleepiness. In that culture, lettuce started to become associated as a food of abstinence, a cooling food to dampen high passions. The calming effects of lettuce may come in handy when dealing with the tiny seeds. If you lack patience, this may not be your method of choice. It is tedious, but there is a clear advantage.
If you're growing lettuce to be used as a cut and come again style, where you just broadcast several seeds and cut them with a scissor later on, then it makes sense to simply throw seeds in the ground and let them sprout. They usually sprout within 7 days outside. However, I personally do like when lettuce forms a nice head and you can harvest the whole thing. And it may be because that's how it's traditionally sold in the supermarket. So if you do want your lettuce to form nice heads, you will need to be more precise in the way that you grow them. You have to start them as plugs and then transplant them in the ground as time comes. They can tolerate a little bit of cold, so around 4 to 6 weeks before the last frost day is ideal.
Pre-germinating your seed ensures even, timely germination. It will also give you a boost of confidence if you happen to be a newbie gardener. I still choose to use it after years of growing vegetables because it works. After lightly sprinkling seeds over the moist paper towel, I close the germination station and put it to rest near a hot air vent, so temperatures inside the enclosure remain around the ideal 75° Fahrenheit. Lettuce can germinate even in the low 40s, just not as fast and efficiently.
I've used this method for several years now, and I've gotten to know precisely how long the different kinds of seeds take to germinate. For lettuce, it should be 2 to 3 days. If it takes longer than that and you have the right temperatures, it probably means that your seed is dead. But don't despair, just try again with new seed.
There is a secondary advantage to using the setup when growing lettuce that may not be as critical for other seeds. I'll show you in a bit, but I must say anyone watching that happens to be a penny pincher and wants to get the most value out of their seed packet will appreciate this method. It is funny because lettuce has been associated with stinginess in the past. When we read the Historia Augusta, tales describing the remarkable lives of Roman emperors, written in a rather gossipy, salty tone, the author characterizes the stingy Pertinax as ungenerous and almost mean, and to put flesh in his accusations, he claims Pertinax would serve banquets consisting of lettuce and thistles and just a scant amount of meat. Apparently, discounting salad as rabbit food goes way back. People only value common things like lettuce when they are forced to go without. Suddenly, it goes from rabbit food to delicacy. Researchers stationed in Antarctica are forced to go without freshies, how they call perishable produce, for months between shipments. And were it not for recently installed high-tech grow labs with artificial conditions, the presence of lettuce in their table would be cause for celebration. While nowhere close to Arctic conditions, I still celebrate the first signs of new life as winter months wind down. After just 2 days in the germination station, the seedlings showed signs of sprouting and needed immediate attention. Just like clockwork. Now, one thing to remember is this is the most critical time. So no matter where you are planning to go or what you're planning to do, if you see that the seeds are sprouting, you have to take action immediately. The sooner you do it, the stronger seedlings you'll have. Many times the issue that people have with this method is that they wait too long to transplant a seedling that has just germinated, and that means that the roots start to weave themselves in the paper, and especially if you're using a stronger paper towel, that becomes an issue because you can't dislodge them without causing significant or even fatal damage to the seedling's roots. When rootlets emerge, they seek fertile ground as the leaves yearn for sun. Like babies, they are hungry for nourishment, and any delay and neglect at this point will spell doom. You may be wondering why I don't plant directly in potting soil trays, as is the norm. Lettuce needs not only moisture to germinate, the seeds also need light since they are photodormant. This is the secondary benefit of using a glass germination station. It allows light to freely hit the seeds, kickstarting the germination process. The trick is to get your seeds as soon as you can into a good quality potting soil. When you're working with the seeds, it's essential that you're very careful not to break the root. If you do so directly in potting mix trays, you should scatter the seeds over the soil surface without burying them, covering the tray with something transparent like plastic or glass. The disadvantage of doing this is that soil has a tendency of molding over if covered for several days. This may lead to fungal die-off and seedling failure. Of course, these are tips to maximize performance, but lettuce is forgiving and resilient anyways. Now, people have been growing lettuces for a long time, and I like to refer to McMahon's American Gardener. It's a true tome, 19th century garden advice. It's interesting to note that even though they didn't have electricity, and because of that they couldn't have artificial lights indoors, they still wanted to grow things earlier. So he advises, but in order to have a few in a more advanced state for transplanting, and also for early small salading, you may sow any of the above kinds in a hotbed. They used hotbeds, which were cold frames with horse manure and straw that was fermenting underneath the soil, and that gave a bit of heat that was trapped by the glass on top. But they still found a way to have their lettuces earlier enough. And for them, it was even more important because they didn't have supermarkets with year-round offerings of any type of food, including tropical fruits, in the dead of winter. So for them, if they didn't grow it, they wouldn't have it. Lettuce started as seasonal foraged wild greens that were later domesticated. As one of the oldest domesticated greens in the Western world, it gave rise to a separate food category christened by the Romans, the salad. Romans were known, however, to cook lettuce and eat it with olive oil, vinegar, and salt. This is quite different from our modern raw salads, but we owe the name to the Romans, who called their salted greens erba salata. Gradually, salad became the first meal to open the palate, most likely as the leaves became less bitter through domestication. It is precisely those bitter compounds called lactones that can induce sleepiness. Lactocin and lactocopicrin protect the plant from munching animals through the bitterness and the sedative effects. After planting my germinated seeds in separate cups with soil, I watered them liberally and put them under common fluorescent lights about 1 to 3 inches away. Placing them near a sunny window also helps them get maximum light, essential at this stage. Whatever cups or pots you decide to use, make sure to drill the bottom for drainage, like I had done to these discarded teacups. I covered the trays with glass to contain the moisture for 1 to 2 days until the leaves start peering out of the soil, removing the glass promptly afterwards to prevent fungal disease. Now, the seedlings only needed time to do their magic and grow. Once the seedlings emerge, ensure that the soil stays moist but not waterlogged. If the soil dries up at this stage, it can be disastrous to these pampered, domesticated seeds. As baby seedlings, these look innocent and sweet, but there is a dangerous side to lettuce. The stronger wild lettuce, Lactuca seriola, is considered a weed in pasture lands because cattle that ingest this plant can develop emphysema. While eating modern lettuce is not likely to cause emphysema in people, there has been recent spikes of Salmonella and E. coli outbreaks in the past decade linked to contaminated lettuce. Hundreds of people have gotten sick and a few have even died. But let us remain calm. The culprit is not the lettuce plant itself, but bacteria from contaminated water sources hitching a ride onto the produce. This is an unintended consequence of the large-scale food industry, with centralized production and packaging and worldwide distribution. The contaminants have come from factory farms that host thousands of animals in confinement. When irrigation canals get infected with animal waste, trouble brews. Growing your own lettuce at home is a great way of making sure it is not contaminated, since you can control the conditions it's grown in, making sure they are sanitary. 12 days later, I had picture-perfect lettuce seedlings ready to be acclimated to outside conditions. It had been exactly 27 days since I put these seeds to germinate. The lettuce has grown phenomenally well, but what I want to do already is to get them used to outside conditions. So since today is a rather warm day, I'm going to take them out for the day and then bring them in at night. And that way they don't get as shocked once I plant them in the ground, which will have to be sooner than later. We were having a rather mild late winter with lows in the 30s and 40s, but the threat of polar vortexes and freak late freezes made me happy to have these as backup. The lettuces were growing at a rapid rate indoors, with higher temperatures and supplemental light. This would give them a huge leg up when planted outside later on. One important consideration is to put your seedlings that are still young and tender in a shaded spot at first, at least for the first day, so that they can get used to the more intense rays of the sun. This process of hardening off is essential for fragile seedlings like lettuce. Pampered indoor seedlings will easily burn their leaves in full sun or strong wind. If we protect the lettuce, perhaps it will also protect us in return. The recent spike of lettuce contamination is truly a consequence of more people wanting to eat lettuce, but lettuce hasn't always been well loved by the masses in recent centuries. After being popular amongst Romans, it gradually lost its place among common folk, fearing impotence. Being carefully grown instead inside of medieval cloister gardens as a talisman against lecherous night spirits. Lettuce increasingly became known for dampening improper desires, and as such, its consumption was promoted within monasteries. paranoia that succumbi and incumbi, demonic, lustful spirits, could attack unsuspecting monks and nuns made lettuce a staple in their diet. By the end of March, after 2 weeks of hardening off my seedlings to outside conditions, I was finally ready to plant them in the ground in a newly constructed raised bed. My native soil is fertile, but if you happen to start with poor compacted soil, you may want to add at least 10 to 15% of compost to improve conditions. I just finished this bed yesterday, so it's rather new, but it should be a perfect place to grow lettuce, especially I think later on as the summer comes in, as this should be a little bit more in the shade than the other ones. I often hear home gardeners obsess over soil amendments and secret potions, but if you are growing in real local soil, most of the time, getting enough sun and water is more critical than soil fertility. If you want to be technical, lettuce needs slightly acidic soil, pH 6 to 7, with plenty of organic matter and a steady supply of nitrogen. They have rather shallow roots, so mulching keeps them well fed and watered close to the roots. As I'm taking here a look at the root systems, this looks beautiful in just the right spot to be planting them as they're starting to get root bound. Of course, since lettuce has a fibrous network of roots and not really a taproot, it does take to transplanting really well. So that's why it has grown well in such a confined space. Medieval clergy, also confined in their cloisters, happened to rely on lettuce's calming effects to control carnal passions. That meant lettuce's association as food of abstinence only grew stronger. Its presence on the clerical table can be seen in Renaissance cafeteria paintings. You are probably very familiar with Da Vinci's Last Supper, but this was far from the only Last Supper scene painted inside of nunneries in monasteries in Renaissance Europe. Plautilla Nelli was one of the few women artists in 16th century Florence who was forgotten by male-centric art history. Together with a workshop of about 8 nuns, she painted a panel in the dining room of her own convent, Santa Caterina. In this Last Supper scene, she includes the typical characters and objects, arranging them in the expected theatrical one side of the table. But the food you find on the table is a bit out of the ordinary to the biblical story. Besides the required bread and wine, she includes a plate of lettuce and some peas, which would be ordinary ingredients in their own tables. By including the nuns' everyday food, Plautilla was making the scene relate directly to their experience. 16th century scholars who published the first herbals were quick to state that lettuce diminishes animal drives and counseled that all who have vowed to remain chaste should eat nothing but lettuce and rocket, another name for arugula. A medieval story seems to show that the powers of lettuce were fickle and did not always work as directed. A nun is said to have unknowingly swallowed an invisible demon that happened to be sitting in her lettuce. Because she had failed to make a cross over the salad bowl, she ended up needing vigorous exorcism to shake the devil out of her. I suppose our modern invisible demons, bacteria like E. coli, don't produce such colorful mythology, but can still be as scary. While monks and nuns in cloister gardens feared invasive night spirits, I was fearing the effects of another nightly visitor that can be more pervasive to gardeners in early spring, a dreaded late frost. These unusual late April frosts are the subject of nightmares to seasoned gardeners. Wow, that's a relief. We had a frost this early morning, and as a precaution, I put up a double layer of plastic that came with a new mattress that I bought, and I thought it would be helpful to have it around for situations like these. It's middle of April. We weren't supposed to have frosts because our last average frost date is actually the last week of March. But you never know. You can always get late frosts, and especially the way the weather is going lately. So besides putting the plastic yesterday,
I actually mulched it a little bit more, and I think that did help. Lettuces can withstand a little frost, but they will experience a little bit of stress, especially if they have larger leaves. So I'm glad that this worked.
With the main threat of frost averted, I could count on having lettuce to harvest as full heads in just a few weeks. We usually have wet springs here in Maryland, so as long as I kept things mulched from now on, they would grow maintenance-free. I wasn't experiencing much slug damage, which can be a real problem in cool, wet springs. Mulch can harbor them. Gardeners in the UK often complain of that. Lettuce, however, doesn't seem to be a favorite of slugs around here. Maybe they just don't want to be sleepy all the time. They already moved too slow to begin with. As the lettuce grew, I planted other batches I had started later, so I could have staggered production throughout spring and early summer.
Now this lettuce is just phenomenal. Makes a huge difference to grow in cups. They just are ready to go in, and I see absolutely no slug damage here, and it's a wet day and there's a lot of mulch. In any case, I must try this because it's so tender. I'm kind of waiting for it to grow a little bit bigger so I can harvest the whole head. Delicious. Perfect. Crispy, tender, flavorful.
While lettuce has gotten a bad rap, it is a healthy plant rich in vitamins, minerals, and dietary fiber essential for gut health. And at least in one case, it caused extreme fortune to one lucky French chap. We all have heard how out of touch the French nobility was by the end of the 18th century. Let them eat cake, or more precisely brioche, were the rumored words of Marie Antoinette, as the country faced famine. There is no evidence she actually said that, yet she still ended up losing her head. But lettuce was the thing that saved a certain French aristocrat, Monsieur d'Aubignac, from destitution after barely escaping from the grips of the bloody French Revolution. He took refuge in London, England, a place notorious back then for less than stellar food, at least when compared to his decadent France. He lived off of a puny allowance the British government gave to those aristocrat refugees, who, on a whole, hadn't learned to do anything useful work-wise. Turns out he still prized good food and would dine in a posh hotel restaurant in the nice part of town whenever he got a chance, even if it meant only ordering one dish. One evening, a group of fashionable English dandies dining next to him in a rather extravagant feast decided to troll the downtrodden aristocrat, wryly asking, "Sir, we have heard that the French are famous for making philosophical systems and salads. We would be happy to entertain one of those tonight, so would you kindly make us a salad?" Well, you know, their upper-class dry sense of humor was somewhat funny and offensive back then. But Monsieur d'Aubignac, instead of throwing an upper-crust tizzy to defend his honor, decided to show them who's boss, or better yet, in French, who's the chef. He asked for vinegar, salt, pepper, and mustard, and whipped up such a marvelous salad dressing that somehow the English dandies couldn't have enough, and after much exultation they spread the word to London's high society. Soon enough, Monsieur d'Aubignac was being called to dress salads with his secret sauce in London's elite addresses. He was paid £5 for his services, which translates to $600 in today's money. Not bad for just tossing together lettuce and accoutrement. Socialite insistence for his savory salad sauce meant that he outfitted a carriage with a mahogany box filled with all sorts of Epicurean ingredients, and with the help of a servant would make the rounds from manor party to manor party, dressing up lowly lettuce, endive, and watercress into delectable experiences. Ever the entrepreneur, making justice to the origin of the French word, the former marquis opened up a shop selling sauces, spices, and culinary dainties. In no time, this gentleman salad maker was rich, and when the revolutionary spirits calmed down in France, he returned home and bought property from the money saved from dressing lettuce, where he lived modestly and happily ever after. While the lettuce I grow will never make me rake in the millions, it does provide a daily dose of joy and satisfaction. Waking up to harvest supremely tender lettuce kissed by morning dew is cause for celebration.
Nothing says spring quite like fresh lettuce. It's one of the most beautiful sights when you see the dew or the raindrops in the morning against the light. It just exudes tenderness and freshness. Growing your greens may seem like a lot of work, but in actual fact, it gives you so much joy, and you really will never be able to replicate it with store-bought produce. Or you'd spend a pretty penny if you were truly gonna pay for what it's worth.
If you want to harvest a full head of lettuce and still have it grow back, you can simply gather all the leaves, cutting a bit above the central stem, leaving the main bud intact. That means your leaves will not stay together, but if there's still cool weather ahead, your lettuce will flush again. If tomorrow won't come and the future's undone, your dreams become forgone. Harvesting only the largest leaves one by one as they mature would result in even more production, as the plant suffers less shock, but that means you never get to eat the most tender, smaller leaves. Within yourself a song. In addition to the lettuce, I harvested some parsley and mizuna to enrich my spontaneous salad. But fate is written slow. I like to soak the harvested leaves with a bit of vinegar to thoroughly wash them. However, struggles spawn. Keep calm and carry on. I decided to come up with a boldly seasoned salad dressing. For that, I would need a molcajete to crush my ingredients, starting with a fresh garlic clove.
Most of the times when I'm cooking, I'm experimenting, so it's rare when I actually follow a recipe. I'm usually playing around with ingredients, and for this salad, I wanted to take a bolder approach and not just do a timid salad, because if you think about it, spring is a time of unapologetic punch. That's when plants just burst out of the ground, and I wanted to use a very pungent flavor, which is garlic, but I'll try to counterbalance it with a little bit of sweet acidity, maybe oranges, and why not use pistachios? I haven't tested it, so I don't know how it's gonna taste, but that's part of the joy of cooking.
The only way to come up with creative new recipes is to experiment often with the ingredients you may have at hand. Not all of my wacky kitchen creations turn out well, but discovering an exciting new recipe is always worth the failures.
Not everyone is a fan of garlic, so you could omit it and maybe use something else. Maybe you could use olives instead of it, or a little bit of cayenne pepper if you want. Heat, but not the pungent garlic flavor. Taste and see how much you put, because maybe just a little bit will go a long way.
After crushing the garlic and pistachio, I got a small bowl to finish my dressing in, transferring the paste and adding a liquid base with the juice of half an orange. Preparing this unusual sauce for my freshly picked lettuce made me think more of what I had learned. As we look into lettuce's history, we discover a duplicitous character, a fertility aid, and a pill to cause impotence. Squaring up this paradox appeared impossible. Were the Egyptians mistaken in considering this plant a stimulant, or did Romans, Greeks, and medieval Europeans completely misunderstand it by labeling it a sedative? The heart of this apparent contradiction may come down to how the chemistry of lettuce interacts with the human body. With the aid of modern science, we may have cracked the code on this ancient controversy. Italian ethnobotanist Giorgio Samorini tested the phytochemicals present in the milky sap of wild lettuce, Lactuca seriola, and was surprised to discover that it has a double opposite effect depending on the dose. If the dose is less than 1 gram, it induces a calming and pain-killing effect through the lactones, like the Roman experience with lettuce. In higher doses between 2 to 3 grams, the stimulating effect of tropane alkaloids prevail, just like the arousing Egyptian lettuce. So the Greeks and Romans were just not eating enough. Of course, the modern domesticated type has lost much of its potency when compared to the wild lettuce. When it runs to seed, however, it does become bitter and tough and should be more powerful. After adding the juice of half of an orange to my experimental dressing, I finally chopped fresh parsley and poured a tablespoon or so of olive oil, seasoning with salt to taste. This turned out to have quite the unusual and surprising flavor profile. I was eager to taste it on the lettuce. I garnished the plate with the other orange half, peeled and finely sliced, adding a few pistachios on top. Now I just had to enjoy.
I really like the combination of flavors here, especially when you bite into the orange, the sliced orange, and it just explodes with sweetness in your mouth. It's just amazing. The parsley also gives the herbal base. This is a surprising combination.
This plate was the first of many daily harvests until the heat of summer set in. Each plant grew at least twice after being cut. The life cycle of lettuce does not end, however, at the plate. If allowed to continue growing, it shoots up a spire of daisy-like flowers that in time turn into seed. I hope you have enjoyed this new video format, a seed-to-plate journey with plenty of history and lore sprinkled in. If you make sure to like the video and leave your feedback in the comment section, I will know if I should continue doing stories like this. I appreciate all my patrons who have helped make this more in-depth video possible. I am planning to release videos less often this year, but I hope the higher quality will make you look forward to the new uploads.